And you're like, so let's say that we're your customer, Josh, and we're like,
Yeah.
Josh, should I buy a managed switch or an unmanaged switch? Like, what is your normal spiel?
Yeah, I think this all got interesting because of a post that preceded your poll.
Yes.
And I made a tongue-in-cheek comment that I realized later, I was like, I'm going to have to circle back on this. So to be clear here, my position on this topic, I can't think in 13, I've spent the last 13 years specifically in industrial or OT networking. I can't think of a single time I have actively promoted or recommended to a customer, you know what you really need is an unmanaged switch. Now, the caveat there is, and just for the purposes of going through the topic, there's a lot of conflation here on terms for two different reasons. One is just general education on networking. So I think a lot of times the term hub and the term switch or term hub and unmanaged switch can get conflated when there is a technical difference between the two. So I'll come back to that in a second. And then the other problem is, I love you vendors, but you also drive me a little crazy because the vendors, I missed 10 years ago when I could have a pretty straightforward conversation with a customer about the difference between an unmanaged and a managed switch. It was pretty clear. These days, if you go to certain vendors' websites, and I'm not just picking on one, multiple vendors' websites that are in this space, you might see that they sell unmanaged switches. They might also sell smart switches. They might sell managed light. They might
that's
sell
my favorite.
Like managed basic, managed enhanced, managed professional, light layer 3. And so now I call it the Spirit airlining of the industry. It's this concept of like they had two price points and one was $1,200 and one was $100. Yep. And they needed to find a way to like put some more price points in there for certain customers that are like, you know what, I need some of those features, but not all of them. So I don't want to spend the $1,200. What can you do for me for $600? And so I understand why it happened. I'm not wholly against it, but from an education standpoint, it is incredibly confusing for the customer. Even if they decide like, we want to manage switch, okay? They go to a vendor who they like, they go to their website, they're like, ooh, wait, which one of these tiers do I need and why? So at the very fundamental level, I just want to differentiate hub and switch for starters, and then we'll chop up managed and unmanaged. So when I say, go ahead,
Josh, if you don't mind, I was going to throw in like one last item of which, like I've seen a lot of instances of, and that's buying a managed switch, but creating almost like an illusion of setting it to the unmanaged switch function, throwing that in and thinking like, well, we've got managed switches all over the place, where that's not really the case, you know what I mean? Like,
and these have been in these recent threads online, so I'll come back. I'll cover this point too. Okay, so hub. When I say hub, like and the problem with this is there's not IEEE definitions for what makes a hub, what makes a switch. There are IEEE standards for features on these switches, like auto negotiation and VLANs and things like this. Excuse me. But for just defining the category, there's not. But when I say hub, what I'm referring to is effectively a multi-port electrical repeater. And in the early days, I say early days because, and the reason this is important to bring up is, I'd love to tell you, I haven't seen a hub in an industrial network in 10 years. I've seen one as recently as in the last 2. Yeah, I mean, they're still out there because industrial automation is industrial automation. People run their equipment into the ground. So if you've got a plant that's been up for 20 years, there's a decent chance there are some 3-com office grade hubs plugged in, with wall warts plugged into 120 outlets in industrial automation panels. And I say this because I come across them all the time in my audits. So a hub, when traffic comes into port 1, it has no intelligence. It is literally a signal repeater. So a frame comes into port 1 and it is going out port. It is just responsible for restoring the signal and timing and wave shape and making sure the signal gets to the next place. But it can't be used in any way to contain, restrict, optimize traffic. This is the dumbest of the bunch. And certainly if anyone out there has hubs, and I've done this before. I said, in the short term, you see my long-term recommendations. In the short term, literally going out to Walmart and putting in some Netgear unmanaged switches in place of these 3Com hubs would drastically increase the situation on your system right now. So that's hubs. So now we have unmanaged switch, managed switch. Both of them, I would say the immediate benefit is they do this thing called learning, listening, forwards, floods, ages. So as they sit there and the system comes up, they're going to slowly learn over time. And another kind of misunderstood fact is I think some people, until they take a little time to learn this or take a training, there's an assumption, because users don't interface with MAC addresses, generally speaking, we interface with IP addresses. So probably a lot of people think that like a switch is looking at IP addresses to determine where to send it. But the truth is the switch could not care less about IP addresses in these frames. The only thing it's looking at is destination MAC address. And it is maintaining a database of MAC addresses to physical switch ports. And so over time, based on devices talking, it learns, oh, MAC address A is on port 1. MAC address B is on port 2. MAC address C is on port 3. So maybe on boot up at the beginning, there's a little bit of flooding going on because it doesn't know where a certain destination is. But as soon as that device responds the first time, it's locked it in, it's in the database. So from now on, when somebody tries to talk to MAC address C, it only goes to port 3 accordingly. So switches are this first device that finally we have some more efficient communication, and we don't just have everything flooding everywhere all the time. My asterisk there is if we're talking about unicast communication, communication that is one-to-one, like Modbus, like explicit Ethernet IP messaging. We might come back to that later if we talk about implicit and produce consume. So immediately there's this huge performance benefit, and you've got your end devices not getting hit with all this extraneous traffic when we go to a switch period. So certainly there is a definite upgrade in going from a hub to an unmanaged switch. But now the next question is, well, what about visibility? You know, what about diagnostics? What if I want to know what's going on this network? I said earlier that physical layer problems are the issue 70, 80% of the time. And I mentioned that I love that you can't hide a network problem from me. And what I mean by that is we've all been on these projects with poor cabling terminations, or maybe EMI or RFI in the area, or unshielded cables being draped across 500 horsepower VFDs that the net effect is, oh, their HMI kind of blipping out from time to time, or timeouts on these messaging or whatever. But I can see that problem on the network with a managed switch. I can log into that managed switch and I can look at the interface counters for a port. And I'm primarily interested in two columns, which is CRC errors and collisions, because every Ethernet frame has a CRC checksum calculated. So between the end device and the Ethernet switch, if anything happens to that data, the switch knows, marks it as a bad frame, something has happened in transit, and drops it and ticks up this counter. So if there is a bad cabling termination that has a real effect in the real world, it will show up as a CRC error. If you've got EMI or RFI in the area affecting the data transmission on your cable, it will show up as CRC errors stacking up on this managed switch. So you cannot hide physical layer problems to me. And it's very easy to go into a managed switch, look at this page. If the physical infrastructure is clean, I'm going to see all zeros down these counters. And I can say pretty quickly, okay, there's not a physical problem right now from cable termination, EMI, or RFI. And you know, based on what I said earlier, boom, that is 75 to 80% of the problems we have ruled out. So let's keep climbing up the chain. So now we look at diagnostics, and we can also look at things like utilization. You know, what is the bandwidth utilization on these ports that might trigger me on a couple of things. I can also look at taking some additional steps on this network. We mentioned these big flat networks. And so beyond diagnostics, there's additional steps we might want to take. We've talked about segmentation a little bit. Let's take that big flat network, break it into smaller pieces, and leverage VLANs so that we can basically make it quieter for everyone. I have this conversation a lot with customers about what exactly is the benefit. And the problem is that broadcast communication, one to every, is inherent to Ethernet communication. In order to be able to talk to your target, you have to ask the question on the network. You have to do an ARP call. You have to say, hey, who has IP address 1.33? Like, what's your MAC address? Because I need to be able to send a frame to you. So broadcasts are inherently part of Ethernet networks. And over time, maybe you get away with the native chattiness and broadcast built into Windows and some of these platforms on a 10 node system, or maybe a 50 node system. If I'm looking at this with Wireshark, you know, I can take a capture and see like what is the average packets per second in this broadcast domain just by plugging in and looking at this one menu in Wireshark. Okay, it's 10, it's 20, that seems reasonable. That's not going to tip anyone over. I plug into some networks and I might see 300, or I might see 1,000, or I might see 6,000, and immediately alarm bells are going off. Like, well, this isn't good, because if 6,000 frames per second are hitting my laptop right now without any port mirroring or anything, that means they're hitting everybody on this network. And PLCs and these embedded devices, there's a lot of conversation sometimes about utilization, about building up these gigabit networks and 10 gig backbones. And I find the whole conversation kind of fascinating, because short of ESXi and giant VM backups across your backbone, or IP camera systems, which, look, that's definitely there on some systems, and that's a different conversation. If we're talking purely automation networks, and we're talking PLCs and HMIs, if those utilizations are even reaching 1% on a 100 megabit link, my alarm bells are going off and I'm going to find the problem, because that is not standard. We're talking about protocols that were initially written for serial communications, right? They were running at 19.2 or 9600, and then we stuck them on an Ethernet highway with a 100 megabit link. Like, in what universe is that pipe supposed to be full? And the reason this is interesting to me is I make the point a lot that you are often going to tip over that end device long before you fill up the pipe. And by fill up the pipe, I mean, if I'm looking at port utilization on switches to an end device, to a PLC, you're going to tip that PLC over, and that utilization might be at 5% or 4%. It is not utilization that is the problem. It's typically about the traffic that is hitting that PLC, and what I like to call like the ratio of good to bad traffic. If that PLC is getting inundated with frames that aren't meant for it, or that it's not looking to process, it still has to process them. It has to look at it long enough to say, this is not for me. And you can literally watch the CPU utilization on ControlLogic's PLC, like in that embedded web server on the CPU or the EN2T card. And you could, you know, track that CPU utilization over time as the system grows and watch, oh, at install, that was 60%. Oh, 10 lines later, it's 80%. And if you dig, like, it's part of, I think it's even built into IAB now. You know, Rockwell like has recommendations about what the ceiling is, and that ceiling is not 100%. It used to be on like EN2Ts. I don't know what it is on the newer stuff like the 4Ts, but it used to be around like this 85 mark, that if you're exceeding 85%, they're probably not able to do everything at max capacity and scan times and everything. And it's time for you to look at breaking up some traffic, adding another card, those sorts of things. So all these things are kind of in the mix, and I find them all interesting topics because of like the misnomers for the ghosts of what the problems are. I think sometimes they get the wrong name and the bad rap.